Like, hey, I heard this thing's really catching on, this idiotic thing about stupid Seattle. That's just a joke. I bet this could be another example of cancel culture. Well, how about we talk about this thing and then we see how cancel culture works? Because I'll bet there's going to be a lot of it going around. If you were to bring up long vein spiders they're pulling out of people that came out of nowhere, I want to clear this up so we can exonerate the safe, effective vaccine as soon as possible. That's what I'm worried about.
Me too.
Will someone think about the vaccine?
So that's the thing that's suspicious. They're not. You have to go to places like this show or his show. What's his name? Neil Oliver. You have to go to, or John Campbell's show.
You got people that,
and then you have to talk about it, and you have to talk about it in metaphors, and you have to talk about it like with a wink, because you can't say what's really on your mind, and that's just it's maddening that this is the world we live in right now, and nobody's got a problem with it except us, except people like us. And I talk about this to other people, and they've never heard of it. And you know why? Because it's not on the news. It's not in the newspaper.
Well, they also don't watch the news.
As Bill Maher would say, it's not in the paper. I saw it in the paper. In the paper. That's what Bill Maher says. It's not. They even talk about. At least Bill Maher was better on the vaccine and better on mandates
because he's a very selfish person who's into granola hippie shit. And PETA.
Well, for whatever reason, he was
self-serving, and so he can see how it's crazy to do that because he doesn't trust stuff, because he's a single bachelor with a great body who's still out there fucking, and he doesn't get why fat people eat all this crap, and so he's health conscious. And people that are health conscious really do their own research, and they think it's weird when you tell them not to. So kudos to Bill Maher and the thing he cares about personally.
So to me, that's the thing that's most suspicious, is that it's not talked about in the news. This isn't front page news. And when you hear about it, like, it sounds crazy. You go, what are they? Are these guys crazy?
Jimmy, I can't tell people stories because they think I'm crazy.
Yes, I know.
Unless I can hold my phone like the Libs a TikTok chick.
Yes.
And go, look, I'm not going to tell you because you're going to call me crazy, because it is crazy what I'm saying to you.
Right.
And then they can look at it and they go, now this is 4 times this happened to me. Yeah, man, I just want to keep my head down and go to work. Okay, we'll get another booster to protect against those weird vein aliens that suddenly have appeared.
I bring it up. I'm in a dentist office, and I bring up, hey, have you heard about excess deaths? No. They say no. Like, you haven't heard of it? Really? You're in the medical profession. You have heard of excess deaths. I'm putting a lot of my money, my retirement money, into precious metals, gold and silver. Why? Because lots of people I trust with money, Max Kaiser's one of them. He's a big Bitcoin guy, and he told me gold is a good hedge against inflation, and gold is a good hedge against the stock market. And so did Carol Roth said that. And then also, who's the guy who wrote the book from Maui, my friend? Why am I blanking on his name? Ed Dowd. So they all said this, so I'm with them. And so I'm putting that into this. And I decided to partner with our sponsor to do this, Colonial Metals Group. They're helping me set up a secure, self-directed IRA where I have access to my assets no matter what the stock market and no matter what the government's doing. So let a team of experts at Colonial Metals Group help you protect your family's future. We've put together a special offer for our audience. Get this offer. Listen to this. You click on the link in the description below or call a special 800 number and you'll receive a safe, and up to $10,000 in free silver. Then the number to call is 888-910-1419. 888-910-1419.
Looks like some big changes happening over at Disney as their board of directors have sent out a panicked plea to investors in a final attempt to stave off what appears to be an even more likely hostile takeover, at least hostile addition from two different people now who want the company to focus on making money and not pushing politics. Just the other day, I reported on the fact that Disney's chief or president of film, is essentially the person in charge of their woke remakes, gone out of the company, and new murmurs as a new CEO, a replacement for Bob Iger. Now, look, Bob Iger, there's a contract in place. His exit is already planned. His exit plan is, kind of already there. But this is an interesting wrinkle out of the board of directors. Now, Disney makes a desperate attempt to sway shareholders ahead of annual meeting. The Walt Disney Company is holding its annual shareholder meeting on April 3rd, which is still more than a month away, and it's urging shareholders to cast their votes in a proxy battle. Disney is battling two activist groups seeking spots on the board of directors, and the company is making every effort to ensure that doesn't happen. We've seen Professor Ludwig von Drake showing how to cast a vote, a video featuring CEO Bob Iger, and now Disney has updated its website with important information, essentially begging investors, the plebes, the retail shareholders, to back the existing board of directors, which ultimately they are the people in charge of hiring people like Kathleen Kennedy, hiring people like Bob Chapek / Bob Iger, and all these woke idiots that they bring in. The Walt Disney Company is holding its annual shareholder meeting on April 3rd. In January, Disney revealed the 12 nominees that they endorsed for the board of directors and shared their official rejection of the activist nominees, Nelson Peltz and James Rizzullo. Now, these two individuals, essentially like how Elon Musk did it with Twitter, bought their way onto, or want to buy their way onto, the board of directors. They've accumulated enough Disney shares to be able to say, like, hey, we own so much stock, we want to say in how you run your business. This is one of the downfalls, I suppose, of being publicly traded. Disney has been making quite the effort to urge shareholders to vote. They've enlisted the help of Professor Ludwig von Drake and, of course, CEO Bob Iger to help inform and guide shareholders to vote for Disney's nominees rather than the two trying to force their way onto it and get the company focusing back on making good films and less on progressive politics. The nominees, rather those from China and Blackwell's, the Vote Disney website was created to help Disney's case and has been updated with a new fact versus fiction. So they've added an entire... They're so afraid of this that they've launched an entire desperate website. We're going to take a look at it. In an official statement, Disney stated that the board does not endorse the nominations of Nelson Peltz.
No, here's the fucking news.
If the CIA have had secret spy bases in Ukraine for the last 10 years and have been engaged in a shadow war, then whatever Putin's invasion of Ukraine is, it ain't unprovoked, is it? So why are the New York Times changing the story now? Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to acknowledge that there are CIA bases inside Ukraine and have been for the last 10 years, and they've been waging a shadow war on Russia from within Ukraine, and essentially deep state interests have been in control of Ukraine for the last 10 years, which is since that 2014 coup, which we've been talking about in independent media, but they've not been talking about in legacy media, and that's before we talk about NATO's role in exacerbating these conditions and the escalation of conflicts between Russia and Ukraine. So why are the New York Times telling us now that there are CIA bases in Ukraine and probably biolabs and all the sorts of things that we've been discussing in these spaces for a while and were, of course, called conspiracy theorists for discussing? It's evidently true. So what's the agenda of the legacy media? Is it as simple as ensuring that funding can continue? And is it clear now that the legacy media are starting to acknowledge that you cannot completely suppress truth? You can employ agencies like Logically AI. You can have government agencies agencies using proxies to crush dissent and censor. But ultimately, and this is actually pretty good and exciting news, we're too powerful now to be controlled. I don't mean we, just me and literally you. I mean the people that occupy these spaces, all of your various resources that you use to formulate your understanding of reality so that you are not subject to the reality that Google and Google AI and the establishment would have you live within. Because remember, it's not that long ago that they told you pretty repetitively and with absolute determination that this was an unprovoked war. But because of the odd, peculiar amnesia of our times, you may have forgotten that, but they did do that. Have a look.
The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification.
On Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine.
The prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine tonight as they suffer an unprovoked and unjustified attack.
Imagine if those announcements, just the ones you've heard already, included we do have CIA bases within Ukraine and have been waging on a shadow war. And as you know, NATO have been provoking Russia for years by inviting Ukraine to join NATO since 2008, knowing that that's a red line for Putin. That can no longer be called an unprovoked attack. It's a provoked attack. It's still terrible for the people of Ukraine. I'm aware and I pray that Ukrainian people are watching this and I pray that they're safe. Obviously not within Ukraine, I'm assuming, elsewhere as refugees due to this terrible war that could be prevented, because I bet you wouldn't be so willing to spend your tax dollars funding the perpetuation of a war that is provoked rather than unprovoked. We'll get into looking at why the legacy media have changed their tune right now. But for this moment, we can double down on the fact that we can't trust them. We could never trust them. Why would you ever trust them? What do you think they are about? Let's have a look.
Russia commenced its full-scale unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
President Putin has launched a horrific, unprovoked attack on their country.
That image, so full of pointlessness and lies, is essentially an artwork at this point. These masks don't work. We know they don't work. This war is completely illegitimate. I shouldn't even really be Prime Minister. I'm pretending to be all nice and I'm invoking emergency. I mean, the whole thing, you could literally go to Broadway in New York. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been preceded with an obligatory word, provoked. The public was told that this was a war without cause, that Ukraine was blameless and that the invasion was to be explained entirely in terms of the intentions and psychology of one man, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Of course, that's why there was so much hysteria about the now famous Tucker Carlson interview, because then you can watch him with your own eyes and you can make your own evaluations about Russian propaganda versus US propaganda, and you can make decisions about your own tax dollars and your own family and your own military and your own community and your own nation, but they don't want you making any of those calculations. However, on the weekend of the second anniversary of the war, the New York Times has published a lengthy article revealing that the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022 was instigated by a systematic and widespread campaign of military intelligence aggression by the United States. We can't make this content without your love and support, and without the support of our sponsors, who we always select on the basis of effective products, like today's. Have you noticed that recently clusters of respiratory illnesses in northern China and what's been referred to as white lung syndrome in the United States are scattered across the headlines? There's hashtag white lung. They're drawing attention, I believe, to the importance of being prepared for medical emergencies. With close to 90% of pharmaceuticals in the US being produced outside of the country, what will happen when the inevitable next global crisis strikes? Countries will clamp down on exports. They'll stockpile, the price of drugs will rise, and the pharmacy shelves in America, they say, will empty. Is it already starting to happen? Well, the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit has got you covered for times like this. The Wellness Company is home to Dr. Peter McCulloch and Dr. Drew Pinsky. They've both been guests on our show. They're truth-telling doctors who are empowering you to take control of your health. 40% of Americans say they would avoid a doctor or hospital unless it was a catastrophic situation. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit provides a solution. This handy little kit includes 8 potentially life-saving medications for you, along with a guidebook for safe use, emergency antibiotics, antivirals and antiparasitics to keep you and your family safe in the face of natural disasters, supply chain shortages, or medical emergencies like white lung or COVID. Go to twc.health/brand and grab your medical emergency kit right now. That's twc.health/brand. Code brand saves you 10% at checkout. So if you use the code brand, you'll get 10% off. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control of your health with the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit. Thank you. Now, let's get into this. The article details long-standing Central Intelligence Agency, CIA of course, operations in Ukraine, in which the agency sponsored and built up the Ukrainian military intelligence agency, HER, using it as a weapon of spying, assassinations and other provocations directed against Russia for more than a decade. Why are the New York Times writing this piece now? Why are the New York Times, which are a mouthpiece and an amplifier of the establishment agenda, choosing this moment to reveal that the CIA did indeed have bases and assets and engage in provocative activity inside Ukraine, which means that it can't any longer be referred to true? For more than a decade, dating back to 2014, the CIA was building up, training and arming Ukrainian intelligence and paramilitary forces that were engaging in assassinations and other provocations against pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, against Russian forces in Crimea and across the border into Russia itself. So that's sort of like there's been a war going on for ages anyway, and all that's really happened is they've just reframed what's happening and increased funding. In a critical passage, the Times writes, as the partnership deepened after 2016, the Ukrainians became impatient with what they considered Washington's undue caution and began staging assassinations and other lethal operations which violated the terms the White House thought the Ukrainians had agreed to. Infuriated, officials in Washington threatened to cut off support, but they never did. In other words, the Ukrainian paramilitary forces, armed, funded and led by the United States and NATO, were systematically assassinating forces supporting closer relations with Russia. Ukraine have their own autonomy, they have their own dignity, and of course they have their own sovereignty. The fact that they have their own attitude to their relationship with Russia, and the fact that they took advantage of an opportunity to escalate tensions knowing they were backed by a military superpower, is hardly surprising, but it is concerning because it's led to this conflict. But I suppose ultimately the United States elite have an agenda to drain and destabilize Russia. And don't you imagine that the increasing hostility in the South Pacific are about draining and destabilizing China? And isn't it becoming increasingly clear that the country of America is one thing, you people, your culture, your country, your beliefs, your values, your Christianity, your tolerance of other religions, all of that stuff is there down here. And then over here are this set of interests controlling, to some degree or another, both political parties and ensuring that they can maintain the forever wars that are their lifeblood, but sadly the death of literally every other territory in the world and a good many of your own citizens if this mentality continues for much longer. The newspaper's account begins with the maiden coup of February 2014, when right-wing and neo-Nazi forces backed by the US and European Union overthrew a pro-Russian president and installed a pro-imperialist regime headed by the billionaire Petro Poroshenko. In a way, there could have been an entirely different trajectory, couldn't there? There could have been sort of an easier, if still somewhat tense, relationship between Russia and Ukraine that didn't really involve the United States and therefore didn't require siloing of weapons that were now no longer needed in Afghanistan into this new territory. A new paradigm was possible, and it seems like it was prevented. Furthermore, neo-Nazi and right-wing, I mean, if our culture is defining itself by one thing, it's its opposition to, these bloody right-wing fascists. I mean, there's barely a mainstream media news program ends without some new person being called a neo-Nazi or a right-wing fascist. When it comes to actual people who come out and tell you, do you know what I am? Please tell us. I'm a neo-Nazi. I'm a new one. Now, can I have some money to go to war against other people? Yes, you can, because we don't care about anything except our own agenda. And yet we will talk about how much we hate Nazis when it's someone like Off the News who wears a tie, who's basically a Christian, who doesn't think about race that much because they live in America and they're American. This coup was the culmination of 2 decades of imperialist inroads into the former Soviet bloc, with the expansion of NATO to include virtually all of Eastern Europe in violation of pledges made to the leaders of the former Soviet Union. The Times is silent on this earlier history, as well as on the role of the CIA in the Maiden events. Why are they silent on those important facts? Maiden set the stage for a massive escalation of the CIA intervention, as detailed in the Times report. The intelligence agency played a central role in fueling conflict between Ukraine and Russia, first as a low-level war against pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, then as a full-scale war after the Russian invasion in February 2022. 3 US administrations were involved, first Obama, then Trump, now Biden. I'm sure you know by now that what I suppose that indicates is that whoever you vote for, when it comes to significant issues like perpetuating forever wars, you don't really have the right to vote. That's why independent candidates like Robert Kennedy, who say they will end these wars, and I pray they mean by that all of these wars, ought to be taken very seriously. According to the Times account, CIA operations included not only widespread spying, but assisting direct provocations like the assassination of pro-Russian politicians in Eastern eastern Ukraine and paramilitary attacks on Russian forces in Crimea. The Times reported that a Ukrainian unit, the 5th Directorate, was tasked with conducting assassinations, including one in 2016. The Times writes, a mysterious explosion in the Russian-occupied city of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine ripped through an elevator carrying a senior Russian separatist commander named Arsen Pavlov, known by his nom de guerre, Motorola. What, after the phones?
So in the end, it was television that killed him.
Yep, very good that. Yeah. Have you got a battery for an Ericsson?
The CIA soon learned that the assassins were members of the 5th Directorate, the spy group that received CIA training. Ukraine's domestic intelligence agency had even handed out commemorative patches to those involved, each one stitched with the word lift, the British term for an elevator. Oh, as long as you're all having fun, guys, now in this massive, expensive, mad war that you keep lying about and simplifying so you can keep funding it, and people sort of going, oh, it's really terrible this is happening. Oh, here, have a patch with lift because we blew out that person, didn't we, in an elevator. That was a lot of fun. You guys called it a lift? We got so much in common. Why don't we bomb some new countries? Yeah, okay then, old chap, cheers. The report describes another such operation. A team of Ukrainian agents set up an unmanned shoulder-fired rocket launcher in a building in the occupied territories. It was directly across from the office of a rebel commander named Mikhail Tolstik, better known as GV. Using a remote trigger, they fired the launcher as soon as GV entered his office, killing him, according to US and Ukrainian officials. I mean, it's quite provocative, isn't it? Like, it's not unprovoked. Anything that happens after that, again, like Putin, illegal war, terrible, children dying, buildings destroyed, tragedy, devastation, it should stop as soon as possible. But this is going to annoy someone like Putin, all of this, isn't it? Since the outbreak of full-scale war, the Ukrainian HERS extended these assassination operations to the whole territory of Russia. Again, that's pretty provocative, including the killing of Daria Dugina, a leading pro-Putin polemicist in the Russian media and Russian government and military officials. I mean, it seems like designed to irritate him into a bellicose state, which it eventually did with the ongoing attempt to recruit Ukraine into NATO. The CIA found its Ukrainian allies very useful in collecting vast amounts of data on Russian military and intelligence activity, so much that the HER itself could not process it and had to forward the raw data to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia for analysis. An earlier, less detailed report on this intelligence collaboration in the Washington Post cited a Ukrainian intelligence official's estimate that 250,000 to 300,000 Russian military intelligence messages were being collected each day. So they were spying on Russia to an extraordinary degree. More funding, more spying, more transgression, more provocation. So again, we just watched the news, unprovoked. Were you spying on us for ages? Yeah. Did you blow up a geezer who was really nice about us on the news? Yeah. Did you get a load of badges done celebrating the brutal assassination of someone with lift on it? We did do that, yes. We all thought it was jolly good fun back at the office, didn't we? Yes, we did. This data was not just related to Ukraine, but concerned Russian intelligence activity all over the world. Long before the Russian invasion, the CIA was seeking to broaden its attack on Moscow. The Times reports the relationship with the Ukrainian HER was so successful that the CIA wanted to replicate it with other European intelligence services that shared a focus in countering Russia. So they wanted to establish it everywhere. A bit like, I suppose, Russia's concern that Ukraine will join NATO, then other border countries will join NATO, then they'd have secret CIA spying bases in them where they would engage in provocative activity and spying missions in an attempt, it seems to me at least, to create one global government ultimately controlled by the interests that currently control the United States, the biggest economy and most powerful nation on earth, replicate that everywhere, and the only things that are powerful enough to prevent that at the moment are Russia and China, so let's crack on and destroy them. Is that basically what's happening? The head of Russia House, the CIA department overseeing operations against Russia, organised a secret meeting at The Hague. There, representatives from the CIA, Britain's MI6, the HER, the Dutch service, a critical intelligence ally, and other agencies agreed to start pooling together more of their intelligence on Russia. Again, provocation. The result was a secret coalition against Russia, and the Ukrainians were vital members of it. All these activities occurred well before the Russian invasion of February 2022, not to mention the 2014 coup, and placing what sounds like a puppet government that was ultimately being controlled by deep state interests. I don't know what provocation could be, if not that. That's some of the most provocative stuff I've ever heard. The outbreak of full-scale war led to even more direct CIA engagement in Ukraine. CIA agents were the only Americans not covered by the initial evacuation of US government personnel from Ukraine, removing only to Western Ukraine. They continually briefed the Ukrainians on Russian military plans, including precise details of operations as they were unfolding. This is just and has always been a proxy war. The nomination of Russia's invasion of Ukraine as the start date seems like the type of narrativization that's favourable to the interests engaged in these years of provocation after sponsoring a coup and insisting that Ukraine join NATO. Actions that seem designed to provoke Russia. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, killing loads of Ukrainian people, causing all that decimation and destruction and all of that criminal and illegal activity, it's because of all of this stuff. And because temporarily Ukrainian interests align with those interests, they're a convenient conduit for the expression of the power of the establishment. And when they're no longer a convenient conduit, they will be pretty mercilessly dispatched, I'd guess. According to the Times, within weeks the CIA had returned to Kiev and the agency sent in scores of new officers to help Ukrainians. A senior US official said of the CIA's sizable presence, are they pulling triggers? No. Are they helping with targeting? Absolutely. Okay, so aim the gun there. Now, are you able to pull that trigger yourself? Well, I am in the military, so okay, well, pull it now and aim it there. Well done, that's good. Any assistance we can give you in this war we're not involved with, you just ask. Could we have some more money? Of course you can, yeah. Some of the CIA officers were deployed to Ukrainian bases. They reviewed lists of potential Russian targets that the Ukrainians were preparing to strike, comparing the information the Ukrainians had with the US intelligence to ensure that it was accurate. In other words, the CIA was helping direct the war, making the US government a full participant, a co-belligerent in a war with nuclear-armed Russia, despite Biden's claim that the United States was only aiding Ukraine from afar. And all of this without the American people having the slightest say in the matter. Don't you sometimes forget that? Don't you sometimes forget that vital detail that America is meant to be your country, was established on those principles. And I really now see more clearly than ever Mike Benz, the expert in deep state activities analysis, that when people say we have to protect democracy, what they mean are a set of institutions that preserve oligarchical power rather than the electoral process by which ordinary people can go, I think I'd like to not be in a nuclear apocalypse, because that kind of democracy isn't happening, is it? The Times account also provides an inadvertent indictment of America's media, as it writes, the details of this intelligence partnership, many of which are being disclosed by the New York Times for the first time, have been a closely guarded secret for a decade. It's written out like it's telling you, here's the inside scoop. Taylor Swift's new beauty secrets are avocado on each of her cheeks. It's not that, is it? It's like, we've been using your money to provoke a nuclear superpower into a war, then we've been telling you that it was an unprovoked war. Oh my God, no wonder she looks so young and fresh. This is propaganda and lying, and no doubt the New York Times are only revealing this now because it's convenient to another agenda that we'll be revealing later in this brilliant article. This admission means that these secrets were closely guarded by the Times itself. So all the time, hey, listen, please don't tell people there have been no clinical trials on this product. Just tell them that if they don't use this product, it's irresponsible and kills old people. You got it, boss! As former editor Bill Keller once observed, freedom of the press means freedom not to publish, and that is a freedom we exercise with some regularity, particularly, we might add, when it comes to the crimes of US imperialism. The Times article is not so much an exposure as a controlled release of information. Yeah, that's what I figured. We're starting to spot that now. As independent media becomes more robust and yet more agile, they have to, at points, recognise, look, do you know what? People can no longer be expected to believe this was an entirely unprovoked attack. There's people going on Joe Rogan, there's Bobby Kennedy out there, people are all the time saying, wait a minute, what about NATO? What about that agreement between Gorbachev and Reagan? Oh, well, let's just say whataboutism is a thing. Yeah, we'll try that for a while. You can't do whataboutism. Just shut up or you're helping Trump. But in the end, we just found out too much accumulative and aggregated information. So in order to a degree, keep a slither of credibility, they're sort of acknowledging, okay, yeah, we provoked this war and we've known about it for ages and the deep state's been inside Ukraine for ages. But also, there's another agenda to do with getting Republicans to support the ongoing funding of this war rather than withdrawing the funding. That's coming in a second. The US newspaper of record reports that the two authors of the piece, Adam Entus and Michael Schwertz, conducted more than 200 interviews with current and former officials in Ukraine, elsewhere in Europe and in the United States. This activity could hardly have taken place without the knowledge, permission and even encouragement of the CIA, as well as the Zelensky regime and Ukrainian intelligence. Wow, as we've been saying for some time, the legacy media works in conjunction with the establishment and deep state to maintain a particular reality that we can all be manipulated into believing in so that our behaviour can be controlled so that we can be shut down. This is a brilliant brilliant, perfect, beautiful example of that. In the meantime, a real journalist, Julian Assange, is awaiting the decision on his final appeal against extradition to the United States, where he faces 175 years in prison or even a death sentence. The crime of Assange and WikiLeaks, which Assange founded, is that they did not obey the rules of bourgeois journalism and did not seek the permission of the military intelligence authorities before publishing their revelations about US war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. The efforts of the US State Department to subvert and manipulate governments and the spying activities of the CIA and National Security Agency. In short, he released information that was favourable to what you might call the electorate or the citizens or the subjects or the people of nations like yours and of mine, in order that we might more discerningly regard our establishment, including the legacy media, who lies to us. And what happens to people like that is what's happened to Julian Assange. But there are other examples of how the establishment behaves if you act against their interests. The exposure of a decade of CIA operations in Ukraine, clearly at the request of the agency itself, appears to be linked to the ongoing conflict within the US ruling elite over what policy to adopt in that war, in the wake of the debacle suffered by the Zelensky regime in last year's offensive, which gained little and suffered colossal losses. Congressional Republicans have blocked further military and financial aid to Ukraine, effectively declaring that the US must cut its losses there and concentrate on the main enemy, China. Concentrate on peace? No, different enemy. Wow, so this isn't being done in order to all the news that's fit to print. This is like all the propaganda that's fit to use to manipulate ongoing forever wars so that we can keep the offices open and the lights on, although we convey mostly darkness. This is the most important couple of paragraphs, I think, in the piece. Have a listen to this, then you will understand exactly what's going on. You can use this to argue with people who still believe propaganda. Check it. By reporting the virtual control of the Ukrainian regime by the US military intelligence apparatus, the Times is seeking to pressure the Republicans to support the war funding. It is arguing that this money is not going to a foreign government in a foreign war thousands of miles from US borders, but to a subcontractor of American imperialism waging an American war in which US personnel are deeply and directly engaged, although some American service personnel are deeply engaged in opposing these wars, as you remember from the sad self-immolation and death of Aaron Bushnell recently. In so doing, the Times has revealed its own coverage of the Ukraine war over the past 2 years to have been nothing more than war propaganda aimed at using a fraudulent narrative to dragoon the American public to support a predatory, imperialist war of aggression aimed at subjugating and dismantling Russia. And the only way, I suppose, that you could argue that that's a good thing is if you saw yourself somehow as a subject and ally of this establishment, or at least your own destiny tied to their ongoing success. In order to believe that, you would have to be in constant fear that both Russia and China have their own imperialist agenda. And if they're not stopped, thwarted, attacked, drained, and covertly and insidiously dismantled, then you and your way of life will be under threat. We learned so much from this. We learned that the New York Times suppresses information when it wants to, that they support the agenda of the establishment, that they totally believe in lying and omitting information in order to ensure that the establishment agenda can be met, even when it's a bloody war that's killing Ukrainian people and Russian people. So you can assume that they might employ similar policies when it comes to the wars in the Middle East and the terrible and tragic deaths that are taking place there. What this ultimately reveals is that the legacy media is part of the establishment. You can't trust anything you read or hear in the legacy media. You can assume from the get-go that what they are doing is either trying to distract you, dumb you down, shut down any possible avenues that are challenging to establishment interests, and even if that extends to claiming that current wars were unprovoked, when the truth is they were anything but unprovoked. And that's not to mitigate, undermine, or dilute the tragedy that Ukrainian people are experiencing. It's just to point out that it's been caused by a greedy, avaricious, and tyrannical global establishment that requires war to sustain itself. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the chat and the comments? Remember, share this video around widely. And if you want to support our content, click the link in the description. We make additional content every week. We're talking to Rand Paul in a couple of days. You can join us for that conversation live and pose your own questions to Rand Paul and be part of a movement that is genuinely interested in changing the world. In the meantime, if you can, stay free. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.
Double kill. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain.
Give up now!
Has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. Enemy killing spree. An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. Shut down. Enemy rampage. An enemy has been slain.
Your commands tire me!
An enemy has been slain. An enemy is unstoppable. Slain. Enemy double kill. Enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. Has been slain. An enemy has been slain.
Stalking prey again?
Your turret has been destroyed.
The magic! It calls
An
to me!
enemy is unstoppable. Shut down. Your turret has been destroyed. You have been slain.
Suffering awaits!
An enemy has been slain. Shut down. An enemy has been slain.
I smell death! Your commands tire me!
You have slain an enemy. Your turret has been destroyed. An enemy has been slain. Killing spree. An ally has been slain. An ally has been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret. Your turret has been destroyed.
Stalking prey again?
Your turret has been destroyed. Your team has destroyed a turret. Rampage. Shut down. Killing spree.
I smell death!
has been slain. An ally has been slain. Dominating. Shut down. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Shut down. Your turret has been destroyed. Shut down. An enemy has been slain.
It comes to me.
An enemy has been slain. Killing spree. Double kill.
Whether we realize it or not, we live in a world surrounded by food preservation. If we go to the grocery store, we have a freezer section, we have refrigerated food, we have canned food, food in boxes. It's all over. In the 18th century, they had none of these techniques, and yet we live in an America that relied on food preservation. Food preservation wasn't invented in the 18th century. To find the origins of food preservation, we have to go back to ancient Egyptians, to the Romans, to the ancient Greeks, to the Vikings. There we can see the seeds of these methods come together. The simplest and oldest technique is drying. How do we get food dry? We want to pull the moisture out of it. And with some items, that happens naturally. All the grains, especially something like maize or corn that we grow here in the United States by the million tons. Corn naturally dries right there in the field. If you look at the ear of corn, it grows up nice and green, and as soon as it starts to ripen, it starts to dry out, and it droops on the stalk, and it's got a natural husk on it, and it dries right there in the field. All we have to do is wait, and then at the end of the season, we pull that off. All we have to do to preserve that is to keep it dry. That's it. It is already dried and perfect in the field. That's similar with things like wheat, barley, rye, even beans, rice, all very similar to that. They basically preserve themselves. For example, the ancient Native Americans are using corn as one of their staple crops, something to eat all through the year because they had corn that they could preserve by drying it. It's just not the grains that we're drying, though. We can dry all sorts of products. Meat, for instance, we can just simply cut different kinds of meat into thin strips and dry it in the sun. Now that sounds a little strange to us. We might think that meat is going to go bad, but if we cut it thin enough, it will extract the moisture rapidly enough that it hasn't gone bad at all, and it'll be a nice dried product that can last a long time. Maybe it won't last as long as grains, which might last for a decade or two, but it's still a very good preservation technique, and it can be used with something that's probably not an oily meat. Something like beef or a lot of different kinds of fish are just simply dried. Probably wouldn't want to do that with pork or with something greasy like chicken or duck. And it really depends on the region you're at. If you're in a very dry and especially cold atmosphere, drying is perfect. So stockfish that was done in Northern Europe, they would dry this, basically almost freeze dry it naturally in the environment. Perfect. No salt, no nothing, just drying. A classic food to dry in the sun would be different kinds of fruit, especially grapes that we turned into raisins, drying things like apricots or apples, and the Native Americans drying pumpkin and using that for months in the future for something like a wonderful succotash. Not every climate or season is good for drying things outside in the sun. Maybe you don't have sun, or you're in a part of the world that just never gets dry. And if you want to dry something, you have to have an alternative method. You have to have a cold fire situation, or just apply heat to it. Without cooking it, or even without smoking it, we want to just heat it up. So we'll have slightly warm ovens, or situations where maybe above a fireplace in a household where it's always dry, and we can dry things like herbs or different grains, even flowers, to keep them preserved for longer. The application of heat to the drying process leads us directly to smoking and how that helps preserve food for longer periods of time. Smoking meat is very popular today, and it's popular today because of the amazing flavor it brings to the food. Usually hot smoking, it's really almost a cooking technique. They may have wanted that flavor, but in the 18th century, preservation was the important part about smoking. They were doing cold smoking, and that layer of smoke on the outside, there's different kinds of chemicals there that resist bacteria and even insects from getting into the food and destroying it. Smoking could be done in almost any environment. If you've got a smokehouse, that makes it really easy, but not everybody could have a smokehouse. But most houses did have a large fireplace. They were capable of having things hanging up higher in the chimney for smoking. there's even people that lament about the change in the fireplaces in the 19th and 20th century, that there was no longer any place in the house to smoke. But smoking could also be done outside, and a lot of smoking was done in primitive situations over a campfire. You just make a rack of twigs to hold the items up off the fire, and you can lay things out and smoke them for days at a time. You'll get a little bit of sun helping to dry the item, and then smoke and the heat off the fire. It's usually done in a combination in our time period. It starts off with a salting process, and then you smoke on top of that. Smoking really lends itself to certain kinds of meats and certain kinds of cuts. The most popular one in the 18th century is bacon. Their bacon probably a little different than our bacon today. But even today, most bacon is smoked or cured. We desire that flavor. In the 18th century, it was all about preserving that bacon so that it would last for months and months. Today, our bacon probably isn't very old at all, and we don't need to worry about that because of refrigeration. Smoking's been popular for hundreds, even thousands of years. We have stories about Roman soldiers on the march. They're eating smoked sausage. Fish can be smoked in several different ways. You see a lot of very primitive situations where they would just smoke fish on a little rack, or very industrially in the 18th century where they would lightly salt a fish and then smoke it in large smoking situations like a smokehouse here. Another ancient technique for food preservation is salting. Salting can happen in a lot of different ways, and it's been done for thousands of years. We have images of the ancient Egyptians salting fowl. There are several different kinds of food that lend themselves to salting, and several different salting techniques, or even ingredients to salting that really cause food to preserve for a great period of time. Meat is a real challenge to preserve, and salting is one of the most common ways of preserving meat. But meat isn't the only thing that we can salt. We can salt things like vegetables or even fruit. When we're preserving meat, though, we usually do either a dry method of salting or a wet method of salting, sort of salting in a brine solution. When we dry preserve meats, we'll use something like a beef. And we will essentially coat it with salt and allow it to dry in the open for several days. And that will draw all the moisture out of the meat, at least as much as we can do in a couple of days. And then we will take all that salt off and pack those pieces of beef in a barrel of salt. And that will continue to slowly draw the moisture out, drying that product out. And that salt will penetrate the beef as far as it can and keep any kind of bacterial growth from happening. But some things are better preserved in a wet pickle, sometimes they call it. It isn't true pickling, which uses vinegar, but a pickling that's in a brine solution. So we will do that to something like pork. So we'll do the same thing. We'll take our cuts of pork, we will coat them with salt in the open, and then pack it in a barrel with more salt, and then pour brine on top of that. That will cause the salt to continue to penetrate into the meat, and it'll cause a softer product. So pork is one of the best things to salt, but it really needs to stay in that brine solution. Now, if we go in and we take pork out of a pork barrel that's been preserved in that method, we will probably have to repack the barrel several different times. So this salted pork might last up to a year, but if we open up that barrel at all, we will have to repack it several times. And each time we'll take that brine out, we'll boil it again to sterilize it, and then repack the barrel. Again, this will last a long time, a full season, a full year, until there's more pork to salt. The end goal here of the brine solution is to keep the meat secure from air. It's to seal that off so that the meat stays good. The brine solution here is a very concentrated salt water. And this is used in all kinds of situations. Most households, they would have a family pig, and at the end of that growing season in the fall, that pig would be slaughtered, and to save up that meat for the rest of the year, they're going to salt that. Besides beef and pork, fish was another food product that was salted abundantly in our time period and previously to that. Fish really lends itself to salting. It's a fairly small cut usually, and the salt penetrates the fish flesh very, very rapidly. And so we can salt in a bunch of different kinds of ways. They would even bring large quantities of salt along with them when they were fishing to sort of pre-salt the fish, to keep them from going bad before they even got back to port. And then a more intense process of salting would go on for some different kinds of fish products. Another classic product for salting that we don't think about much is butter. So today we have salted butter because we like the flavor of salted butter. But salted butter, especially in our time period, it was much more heavily salted and salted because that would preserve it. It's interesting to look at the period recipes because they use different types of salt, different grain sizes of salt, all in one recipe, knowing that it takes different kinds of salt to penetrate the meat and continue to penetrate the meat. If we use just one kind of salt, it's not going to do it right, and it's not going to give us the right kind of flavor. Sometimes regular salt, sodium chloride, isn't enough to preserve the meat, especially from particularly bad organisms like botulism. If we want to protect against botulism, you have to use something like sodium nitrate or potassium nitrate, and that is included in many of these salting recipes. Now you might think that this salted meat sounds too powerful to eat, and in a sense it really is. It's probably the reason why we don't see a lot of salted meat products today, because you just can't cook with them immediately and have anything that's palatable at all. It's way too strong. So to cook a salt beef or to cook a salt pork or salted fish especially, you have to soak them in water and even discard the water several times, add more water back in. So it might take an entire day of preparing your salt meat before you're ready to cook it in a dish so that it's edible at all. In our 18th century time period, storing items in a brine solution was called pickling. But true pickling is storing food in an acid environment. Basically, we were taking food items and submerging them in vinegar. And the classic today would be pickled eggs or pickled onions. Those are very common, but that isn't the only thing that we pickle today, and certainly not the only thing that was pickled in the 18th century. We can pickle meat, but usually pickled meat is a cooked meat, and then it's submerged in the vinegar. They had collared meat products that they called in our time period that would be a meat that was rolled up with lots of different kinds of spices. It would be cooked, sometimes it was dried, and then submerged in our vinegar pickle. Now this would cause a very soft meat when it came out of that and had a very, very distinct flavor. This is probably the most common method of preserving food in the 18th century as well as today. Everybody can go to the store and get a jar of pickles. And a lot of our food products today are stored with a specific kind of acid content, particularly for that preservation that's going on. What's kind of interesting here is what started as a food preservation technique turns into something today we desire as a flavor and a texture difference. We want that brightness and the little bit of saltiness that we get out of a pickled food product. That in the beginning, it was all about food preservation. Now it's all about flavor. In pickling, we're placing our food in an acid solution. But what if we could have the food create the acid itself? That's where fermentation comes into play. Probably one of the most classic fermented products that was popular in the time period and popular today is sauerkraut. It's pretty amazing. We can take cabbage, which was very inexpensive in our time period, a typical food for the poor. We can slice it thinly, place it into a crock with a little bit of salt in layers. It will naturally start to pull that moisture out, and then it will start to ferment. Ferment with yeast that's sort of right there. The sugar that comes out of that cabbage starts to ferment and turn into a little bit of alcohol and bring its own acid into it. And this gives it a great flavor, and it preserves the cabbage. Now, fermenting obviously isn't just going on here in the 18th century. It's being used for thousands of years all around the world, especially all those amazing pickled products from Asia. Beer is a fermented product, and of course we enjoy it today, but it was the lifeblood of the 18th century. There are places that the water is not safe to drink, but yet the beer was. Now, all we're taking here is converting some of the sugars from the grains, we're fermenting that, and of course, we desire that kind of flavor that we get. Now, this happens not just in beer, but fermenting is going on in wine. Fermentation is also used for milk products, and we can do multiple different kinds of fermentation with milk. We can let milk just sour or turn it into a buttermilk. We can also make soft cheeses and hard cheeses. It's all about what kind of culture is going on and how much salt might be in a mixture to save milk not just days, but months or even years. Sometimes preservation isn't about necessarily survival, but it's about how to best use what we have, especially if too much comes in at once. If we have a giant harvest of fruit, maybe the best way to keep from wasting it is to turn it into an alcohol. We might turn it into a wine or even distill that into a brandy. Using sugar is another way to preserve food. Usually it's done with something like fruits. They really lend themselves to sugar preservation. And this, again, has been done for hundreds of years. We have the Romans submerging things in honey. And in our time period, they're sugaring different things, coating them in sugar. That sort of draws out the moisture. And the sugar itself is antibacterial. It keeps them from spoiling. Another way to achieve the same thing, especially with fruit, is to make a concentrate. We drive the moisture out of the fruit, usually just by boiling it, and that increases its sugar content to the point where it won't spoil. Jams or jellies are something that we have today that we use, and we just take that fruit and we boil it down. Sometimes we add a little bit of sugar and it'll keep for a long time. There's circumstances where they didn't know that fermentation was going on. We have a combination of preservation
preservation techniques happening. So sausage is a perfect example. We will have a salt going into our sausage to preserve it. We'll have spices going in to preserve it. We'll have smoking going on. And there's also fermentation that's happening almost exactly at the same time. It makes it a very complex product with a lot of complex flavors, and all these different things add up to a preserved food. You probably have canned food in your pantry right now. They didn't have cans in the 18th century, certainly not metal cans, but they did have a way to do almost exactly the same thing. Now, in a canning situation, we are bringing a food up to a pasteurized temperature, and we're sealing that food away from any kind of oxygen, and so that no new bacteria can get into that environment to infect the food and start to make it spoil. In the 18th century, they did potted meats, which effectively did almost exactly the same thing. They would cook a meat in a little kind of vessel like this. Usually it was very finely shredded. They would cook it with a lot of fats that would necessarily kind of move up to the top and then seal that off, sort of automatically. And then they would come in and put a little bit of a paper seal on top just so that the fats on the top could not spoil on the very top of that. Clarified butter was sometimes added to the top, again to seal that off, a natural fat barrier to keep oxygen away from the food. And we would preserve things in bottles in the time period. Whole fruit, something like cherries or strawberries, we could submerge them in water or sometimes in alcohol that would preserve them for a very long period of time. And the bottle is specifically made to have a small surface area so that oxygen couldn't get to the contents. Now, these are all in hard containers, usually ceramic or glass, and today we would use metal. But in the time period, sometimes they would use the food itself to seal it away from the air. So they would cook specific pies, meat pies, with a very, very hard crust. And the crust itself was not really meant to be eaten. It was to seal the food for preservation. We think of meat pies today and we want to eat the crust, and that's part of it. But in the time period, it was all about food preservation. And the crust was something that might not be good after a couple of weeks, but the contents still would be. So we'd eat the inside and then throw away the crust. There are all these food preservation techniques, and there's one set of people that seem to have to use all of them, at least in one little kind of way, and that's the military, and maybe even specifically men on board Navy ships of the time period. They have to use all these different food techniques because they are away from land. There is very little food that you can just get out in the middle of nowhere. Yes, occasionally you can catch a fish, but you can't depend on that. So they use salt provisions, they use fermenting, they use all these different things together so that they can survive over thousands of miles of ocean travel. It can be easy for us to imagine that we would need food preservation for winter. But the reality is there's so much more to that, especially in the 18th century and for people in North America. You can't travel the oceans, and that's how you get here, unless you have food preservation. You can't move from the East Coast into the West unless you have food preservation. You really can't have America without food preservation.
An enemy has been slain. Minions have spawned. You have been slain. Enemy has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Double kill.
Reporting
An
in.
ally has been slain. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Killing spree. You have been slain. Enemy double kill. Your turret has been destroyed. Shut down. An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. You have slain an enemy. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret. Shut down. Enemy rampage. Your team has destroyed a turret.
Reporting in.
Shut down. Enemy double kill. Slain an enemy. An enemy has been slain. Shut down. Your turret has been destroyed. An enemy has been slain. Enemy rampage.
Yes, sir.
An ally has been slain. Enemy double kill. Your team has destroyed a turret. Has been slain. Your turret has been destroyed. An ally has been slain. Enemy double kill. Aced. Your turret has been destroyed. You have slain an enemy. Shut down. Your team has destroyed a turret. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Your team has destroyed an inhibitor. Your turret has been destroyed. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. You control the battle. An enemy has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Has been destroyed. Ace. Your turret has been destroyed. Shut down. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed.
Find me.
I'm on the case.
What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and today I got some really interesting news coming out from both the western and eastern sides of the industry. From a gaming award magazine giving rewards for who panders the most, Baldur's Gate 3's devs being attacked by their own fans, and Japan washing their hands of all of this. And I want to discuss how the industry has been formatted to accommodate and encourage certain kinds of content in the form of awards, and why that's really weird and how it affects everything beyond. So let's begin. Firstly, I want to talk about this gaming awards thing. So there's a website called gamingmagazine.com. It's a website that champions and promotes everything within geek culture that includes LGBTQ+ ideas. The existence of this site isn't surprising since there are plenty of websites all over the internet that each cater to different things. Like Geeks of Color, which is another site meant for gamers who are people of color, which I had a whole feud with that site a few months back already cause they're weirdos. And of course, you have sites that cater to certain consoles or platforms, PlayStation Lifestyle, Nintendo Life, PC Gamer, it goes on. So the existence of a gay-only gaming website is not really out of the ordinary to me. I'm surprised I only recently discovered it and that it existed, to be honest with you. But anyway, this site apparently hosts an award show that gives out awards to certain game studios based on how well they represent LGBTQ+ representation in their games. They have reward tiers like Game of the Year, Industry Diversity Award, Best LGBTQ Character, and Authentic Representation. And of course, all the games nominated, which include stuff like Baldur's Gate 3 and Spider-Man 2, are of course only nominated as long as they pander to some level when it comes to this community. The existence of an awards event like this is not surprising, but it does make my eyes roll. And it speaks to a larger sentiment within the broader gaming industry community. Considering in 2023, every single game nominated at the Game Awards had to some extent some form of gay representation in it. And of course, the best-selling game of 2023 was Hogwarts Legacy, which did have representation as well, like gay wizards and a trans innkeeper. But of course, since J.K. Rowling is essentially the devil to progressives, Hogwarts Legacy is lumped in with Rowling even though she didn't have any real creative input on the game that we know of anyway. Yes, she would financially benefit from the sales of the game, considering she owns the Harry Potter IP since she made the books, but even though Hogwarts did include representation, the mere fact it was tied to Rowling meant the game was a boogeyman of the industry. And that's why come awards time, Hogwarts Legacy was suspiciously absent across the board at pretty much every major gaming website or award show. It was treated as if it never existed, even though it outsold Call of Duty that year and was officially the highest selling game of 2023. But because of the politics attached to it, Hogwarts Legacy was excommunicated from awards season. Some may see this as fine, but I think it paints a different picture entirely for how the industry is moving forward. Baldur's Gate 3, of course, is loaded with representation, but the reason why the game has been a hit with pretty much everyone is simply because the quality of the game is incredible. And like I've said in previous videos, BG3 smartly doesn't treat its LGBTQ characters as trophies. but instead just has characters within, like Dame Aylin and her girlfriend that just so happen to be in a lesbian relationship. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, it just exists that way. And like I also said previously, Larian Studios is smart because you don't actually have to engage with that content or see characters of the same sex kissing if you don't want to, which makes sense since the game is of course all about player choice. So for some, Shadowheart, who is actually nominated in that Best LGBTQ Character category at the Gaming Awards, has a weird disconnect to it, because I'm sure for many who played as straight male characters, Shadowheart was also their love interest. So in their eyes, Shadowheart isn't LGBTQ, but this is the masterstroke of Larian, because they're able to, for a lack of a better term, have their cake and eat it too. And they can cater to the straight group of players while also getting the gay community as well with the same characters. And it all comes down to choice, of course, but it does irk me a little to see that there exists an award ceremony strictly for gay representation. Because while I do assume its existence is the result of good intentions, it also proves that pandering on purpose is a very real thing, because not only is there investment incentive via ESG, but now there's awards as well. And like I was saying with Hogwarts Legacy, that game's exile by the entire industry come award season felt more like a sacrificial lamb being thrown into the fire. In order to make an example out of it to show other studios that if you don't play ball and cater to the strict guidelines of what's acceptable in the modern gaming industry, then you will not only be excommunicated but treated as if you never existed to begin with. And I genuinely believe it's insane that Hogwarts Legacy was removed from the conversation entirely, since I found the game to be genuinely great. And I do fear that due to how Legacy was treated by pretty much the entire industry, it will set a standard where development studios will have no choice but to submit to including pandering elements on purpose. And not because they want to, mind you, but because if they don't, they could face the same fate Legacy did when it comes to awards. And of course, being showered with awards helps with future sales, since you can slap on the box or digital marketplace that, hey, your game won Game of the Year, or Best RPG, Action Game, whatever. It's the same thing with the Oscars in Hollywood. A majority of the recipients of awards at the Oscars don't actually gain their rewards because the movie or actor is great. But in fact, it usually comes down to which studio lobbied the hardest, scratched enough executives' backs with bonuses, and threw money around to ensure their movies, which are products at the end of the day, go home with some sort of Academy Award. So when they release their films on streaming or to buy in a store or something, they can slap Academy Award for Best Actor or Movie on the cover, because that'll entice people to buy or rent the movie because they see that seal of quality that they've been conditioned to believe actually matters. When in reality, it is, like I said, mostly just smoke and mirrors in the end. Sorry if I just ruined the Oscars or Golden Globes for you, but yeah, that's usually why things happen the way that they do. After all, Hollywood, like gaming or any other industry, is a business. And be honest with yourself, you likely have watched a film because of the Academy Award connection to it, or played a game you wouldn't normally play because it won Best RPG, or maybe it has a high Metacritic score, so naturally you think it's good because of an arbitrary number on a website dictated by dozens of people you don't even know in real life. The point is that whether it's Hollywood or anything else, there is genuine incentive to lobby and pander to various groups in order to gain awards and recognition. I guarantee you, if BG3 didn't have any representation like it does, but was still a solid RPG with a great story, it wouldn't have won as many awards as it did. And it definitely wouldn't have been nominated for this unironically titled Gaming Awards program either. But the fact that we've seen Hogwarts get removed entirely as if it never existed is proof that favoritism and tribal-like tactics are alive and well when it comes to video games. And if I had to wager and guess, I would strongly believe that Stellar Blade, when that releases, won't be nominated for pretty much anything when it comes to awards season. Even if it ends up being a great game or it sells millions of copies, which I do believe it will be a success regardless, the fact its existence and what it represents runs counter to what Western industries want in their games will likely mean Stellar Blade will be left in the cold. Because, after all, stuff like the Game Awards or the various sites that do their own award seasons, like the IGNs or GameSpots or this gaming magazine for example, they are all intrinsically tied and adhere to the Western ideological monolith that dictates a lot of the things we see and hear today. As I said in my previous video, a whistleblower exposed how Naughty Dog, who made The Last of Us, is being forced to pander. And developers who disagree with these progressive mindsets are discouraged openly to not express their opinions. Meaning, there are many developers these days that are absolutely living in fear of job security and just simply agree with the monolith rather than stand up against it. Take for example Mark Kern, who goes by Grums on Twitter. He retweeted my video about the whole Naughty Dog expose and said this: "The Last of Us devs live in fear, force female characters to be less feminine, to satisfy diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, but not the ones you think. I know many devs who have to keep their heads down or be fired for voicing their concerns." And I believe Mark, since he worked on plenty of AAA games himself. He was the head lead of the original World of Warcraft game, and was also the producer on Diablo 2 and worked on StarCraft as well. So a guy like this, who has seen the monolith and experienced it firsthand, saying what he's saying is not only sobering, but kind of scary that he also confirms that it exists. And when I say to you, dear viewer, that there is a concerted effort to force media to adhere to policies and regulations like this, the question then must be asked, which is, are the games being made the way they are due to genuine passion? Or do they exist as they do to ensure the tidal wave of identity politics doesn't drown them into the depths of oblivion? I would love to speak to any developer who's worked within these conditions, because I truly want to know what's happening. And since I'm likely already blacklisted from many game studios or events already anyway for talking about what I do, I don't exactly have any opportunities to lose to begin with. I only answer to the audience anyways, so I would love to know the dark truth behind these things firsthand. Although, while Larian is being showered with praise for their representation efforts, they are also being attacked by their own community as well. Recently, Baldur's Gate 3 has been confirmed to be getting official mod support in the future. So not only PC, but even console versions of the game will have access to the insane amount of mods BG3 has available at some point. But because of this venture into officially supporting mods, it will of course lead to updates that Larian sends out that will, understandably, not work from the get-go with certain third-party mods that fans make. This is not because Larian doesn't agree with a mod or something, it's literally because with a game with these many moving parts, these official updates will likely break random mods to varying degrees as bugs and issues can and will be ironed out. There's really no way for Larian to do this sort of thing, which is free by the way for you once it arrives officially, without it destroying or screwing up someone's game, since there's just so many mods to begin with. Anyway, a vocal minority of fans are attacking Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian by sending them death threats, saying they need to either leave the modding community alone or face backlash. One of the lead devs on BG3 had this to say regarding that pushback from that vocal minority of the community. They said, and I quote, "We'll be talking in depth about what our mod support will look like soon. Been working on it since launch. As always, we'll discuss it in our own way with our community. Threats and toxicity against our devs and community teams will only harm the conversation. Please stop that. This is a game that went from 2 million players to way over 10 million in a very short space of time, so it's natural the conversation becomes muddier and complex. But in order to maintain the same level of dialogue, we need people to understand that these conversations take time. We can't do it at all without the dedicated community teams that work to untangle a giant web of noise into something we can work with for the benefit of everyone. If you truly want to know things about the game, please don't chip away at the people who connect us all. 99.9% of our community are the absolute best, and it's because of them, thankfully, that my community team perseveres. But I suppose it was inevitable that when you have a city, a few bad eggs will start a fire. Until then, BG3 does not yet have mod support. Don't get angry at mod authors, support teams, community, or developers. Our focus is to patch the game while working on future mod support. I understand why it's frustrating, so what we all need to do is focus on that future, end quote. And I think what the developer of publishing for Larian said here is fine. He's not trying to attack the community or anything else. He's simply letting the fans know that, hey, this game has got a lot bigger way faster than Larian first intended. And they are working diligently to ensure that mod support can come to everyone regardless of platform. But due to how big the game is and all that, these things will obviously take some time. And I agree that attacking the BG3 community or the devs will just help no one. And under no circumstances, I don't care what it is, but I don't endorse the concept of death threats against anyone regardless. Plus, like I said, since BG3 is getting mod support for free eventually, how can you even really complain? But it's not surprising, since there will always be a subset of fans who will complain when things don't go the way they want or not as quickly as they want. I think Larian has already given enough to the community as is, so the fact they're doing what they're doing again for free is amazing. So if you're mad at the whole mod support thing and issuing death threats, please stop immediately. It's never that serious. These are real people who love that game as much as you do. And we don't benefit from the harassment or threats over things like this. In the meantime, maybe put BG3 down and go play something else. Maybe something Japanese made even, which brings us to the next part of this video with this article from Bloomberg titled, Investors in Japan Drain $4.5 billion as they exit ESG funds. You read that right, fellas. Japan's economy has confirmed that it is largely abandoning the economic push for ESG when it comes to their products. Not entirely rejecting it, mind you, but this is a massive blow regardless. Apparently, according to Bloomberg, in 2021, Japan had a massive increase in ESG funding from their investors across the board, a total of around 1.8 trillion yen. In terms of how much that is in American, 1 trillion is around $6.6 billion. So we could guess around $12-ish billion American was invested in ESG ventures in Japan from 2021 onward or so. And now that money is being pulled out. Why, you may be asking. According to a director of manager research at Morningstar, which is a company known for calculating the investments of other companies that ESG is, in their own words, rather than being a response to investor demand for sustainable investments, ESG was seen as a theme. And according to Morningstar in 2023, for example, there were no new ESG products launched between October and December of last year. Meaning the interest in ESG-riddled products in Japan anyway are starting to slowly but surely die out in major parts of their economy. And according to one analyst Bloomberg asked, they don't believe interest in ESG will continue or return within Japan's economy anytime soon or ever at all. Of course, this doesn't mean ESG and pandering is gone entirely from Japan. There will always be some level of it within every economy or country. But it's sobering to realize that as far as the vast majority of Japanese companies are concerned, they have no interest in it compared to their Western counterparts. Of course, Sega has recently said they are open to diversity hiring and all of that, and then I decided to look even deeper. And it turns out Sega has an entire webpage created targeted towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it strangely looks a lot like the Sweet Baby website format too. I mean, here, let me scroll down and you can see what I mean. You'll see that Sega is pushing for DEI and inclusivity amongst their groups and are actively engaging to increase their ESG scores. Mind you that Sega is a Japanese company, and what's happening here is not the norm for that side of the world, as I stated, with the 1.8 trillion yen being removed already. So for all I know, this website and this push could be a part of that almost 12 billion American pullout. And this site and these motives could be erased or downscaled for Sega in the near future. But as it stands, I mean, I'm scrolling here, and as you can read and see, they are absolutely looking pretty westernized here, which worries me greatly, and hopefully Sega realizes before it's too late and there's no turning back. But as you can see, whether it's the gaming award show that rewards good behavior on behalf of communities by pandering, or Japan, which has all but pushed away these concepts, albeit for Sega apparently, this is still a very real issue, and while I don't necessarily believe the existence of a gaming award program is any different than any other per se, I do believe that we're seeing the industry reach a point where they will need to play by the rules of a few in order to be accepted into the limelight. And I personally don't think that's right, but I guess we'll see as time goes on. And for some, the pandering is through the roof. Look at this Tomb Raider tabletop game, which apparently features a character with a bow and arrow that also has a half-shaven haircut. And they're missing 2 legs, and their body type is heavier than average. The pandering doesn't stop, fellas, and this just looks like it's incredible in all the wrong ways. I couldn't make a more pandering look if I tried. I genuinely can't believe there's developers or artists out.
Shut down. Someone call for a catch. An ally has been slain.
On to the next game.
charges. No hesitation. Enemy rampage. I'm not here to serve. I'm here to protect. Aced. Case closed. Aim to win, and my aim is perfect. A true professional is always aware of her surroundings. Please maintain a proper chain of command. An enemy has been slain. Enemy has been an easy qualla. I much prefer this to desk duty. If time never sleeps, then I best put on another pot of tea. Has been slain. I work for its people, no one else. Crime is common, logic is rare. Shut down. It's my business to know what others do not. Boom, headshot. Aced. Your team has destroyed a turret. This time I will not fail. I must always be 3 steps ahead. Let's investigate. Killing spree. No stone left unturned. I'll have this finished before So, as you come to this. I never miss. Rampage. An enemy has been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret.